Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's WSET Wine Explorer series. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive on Indian wines with Karan Vasani, the COO and Chief Winemaker at Sula Vineyards. My name is Alex Decatur. I'm part of the business development team of the EMEA region. So we do a lot of work in Europe, Middle East, the UK, and also India as well. So today's topic, Indian wines, we'll get onto quite soon, but I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. Now, first of all, there'll be a feedback form, which will pop up near the end. It would be really great if you could give us some feedback to tell us how much you love this. If you have any questions, I think this is one of these topics where there will be questions and Karen's the man to answer them. So put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them near the end. We'll have plenty of time to answer the questions as well. Some more housekeeping. If you missed this, well, if you're listening to me, you haven't missed it, but you know what I mean. These are all available on the WSET Global Events Hub on YouTube, so you can go there and look at it for free. Little bit about the WSET. You know us, we've been doing this for 50 years. We're the world leading provider of qualifications and courses in wine, spirits, and sake. The WSET, we work in over 70 countries in over 15 languages, and we have over 800 what we call APPs, approved program providers, who they do our courses. So if you want to know any more information about that, the best place to go is wsetglobal.com, and you can find information. Also, relevant to the topic, if you happen to be in India, if you're listening from India, WSET and Sula will both be at ProWine Mumbai, which I believe is something like the 24th and 25th of November. So see us there. But on to the main show. Karan Vasani, please, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on wherever you all are joining from. Thank you so much for registering, making the time and joining this. I hope the next 1 hour we can educate and entertain both. Thank you to WSET for giving me the opportunity to showcase what we do here in India a little bit. We're not really known for wine, of course. It's not really the first thing that pops into people's minds when you think of India. There are so many other things that come into people's minds, but we do make a little bit of wine, and just wanted to share what we do with you. So should be moving to the next slide. There we go. Going to give you everyone an overview of starting with tropical viticulture, because that's really something that's unique to India, and how we grow our grapes is very different to the rest of the world. We'll then touch a little bit about the Indian wine market, talk about the main grapes and wine styles, and then get into questions and answers. And please feel free to keep putting questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I will try and get to them during the course of the presentation as well, if I'm able to. Otherwise, at the end is good as well. And controversial and fun questions are always welcome, that they keep it interesting. All right, let's get into it. So India, tropical viticulture. What I have is on the screen is one of my favorite slides, I think, from the WSET Level 1 deck, which shows, the traditional wine growing belts in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, 30 North to 50 North and 30 South to 50 South. And as you can see, we are nowhere close to that. We're making wine in India in very much a tropical climate, pretty far away from the traditional winemaking belts, and it comes with its own unique set of challenges. I think the first thing that surprises people is that though we're Northern Hemisphere, where I am right now in Nashik, which is the hub of Indian wine, we're at 20 degrees north, but we follow a Southern Hemisphere harvest pattern rather than a traditional Northern Hemisphere one. Our grape harvest happens in January, February, and March, not the conventional, Southern Hemisphere pattern of September, October. And why is that? Because, we're Northern Hemisphere, December, January are the coolest times of our year, but we're a tropical climate, so we're definitely a bit warmer. And the other key hallmark of the tropical climate is that we will have a dedicated wet season where we will get most of our rain, and we get a fair amount of rain. Nashik is 700 to 800 millimeters. That's what we got. We were hit 700 in 2023. In 2022, we got 1.7 meters of rain. in Nasik. And that wet season is July, August, September. Yeah, you're not going to ripen the grapes and harvest grapes to make wine in a traditional northern hemisphere pattern of September, October, when you're getting that much rain. Even 600, 700 millimeters of rain is not going to happen. So we follow a southern hemisphere pattern. Now, immediately, of course, the question will be about winter and how all of that works. Our winter is actually warm enough to ripen the grapes. So traditionally, northern hemisphere, you would have, or anywhere, you would have the season begin in spring. After winter, it would bud burst, and then the season would go on, and you would have the growing season over spring and summer, and harvest into autumn, and then the vineyards would go dormant in winter. For us, our winter is actually warm enough to ripen the grapes. Our grapes ripen over winter, and we harvest them before peak summer hits us in April and May. So it comes with its own unique set of challenges, which we'll get into in the next couple of slides. But India is a big country, and I just thought, let me show you where wine is made in India. These regions, the states of Maharashtra right here and Karnataka down below, are the two main wine producing states in the country. Grapes are grown across the country in small quantities. They are a commercially important crop. But grapes used for making wine are only in these two states. And within Maharashtra, which is the state up here at the north, sorry, I couldn't have the names on there, Nasik, which I'm sort of circling with my mouse pointer, hopefully you can see that, is the wine capital of India, where, about, I would say 60, 70% of the country's wine grapes are grown and wine is made. And then this entire area around here is a bigger belt. And then we have Bangalore down in the south, which is a bit of a smaller region. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of an idea. No doubt there are going to be vast unexplored terroirs in the country. Up here, right up north in the state, in Ladakh, which is which is sort of a high altitude desert, which is 34 degrees north. So in the belt, in the wine growing belt, there are grapes grown there as well. Grapes are being grown everywhere. And I have no doubt that, over the next 20, 30, 40 years, new terroirs will be discovered and wine will be made in new places in India. So I'm just going to leave this slide up for a second for everyone to have a look. It's a bit data heavy, so just take a moment. So what I've got here is a traditional Southern Hemisphere growing season. I've taken the Barossa Valley as an example. Any region works fine, just for illustration, it's the Barossa. And I've compared it to Nasik, which is India's wine capital. Both the graphs start from September, temperature from 0 to 40 in centigrade on your left axis, on your y-axis. So easily comparable. And what I'd like to draw everyone's attention to is that in a traditional Southern Hemisphere or a traditional growing season anywhere, as you come out from spring and you get going, you're going to have consistent increases in temperature, and temperatures peaking just around harvest time and then starting to dip towards the end of harvest. It starts to get cooler. For us, when we start, our season starts off in September, it progressively gets cooler and cooler. The daytime high stays roughly the same, but you start reaching that daytime high later and later in the day and for fewer number of hours in the day. So you get progressively cooler. So we get sort of bud burst here in September, flowering somewhere around mid-October, and we go through veraison, which is, where the berries will soften and the grapes whites, it'll turn color. red grapes will turn color. That's usually pretty much at a warm time. For us, that happens at the coolest time of the year. And then gradually, post-veraison, as we get into harvest in February and March, things start getting warmer and warmer. So we get a little bit of a cool climate pattern as well. And then we get really, really hot. So just the factors that I've got, sort of up there on the screen, getting cooler as the season starts, veraison at the coolest time, temperatures increasing, and then harvest completing before the hottest time of the year. And that's really a key one, which influences, how we make our wines. In most traditional climates, let's say you were growing Cabernet and you felt the flavors were not really there, and you had a bit of, green methoxypyrazine, bell pepper, that you wanted to let it hang a little bit more. Sure, you might still the sugar might keep ticking over gradually, but it would not be as rapid a rise as earlier, because typically you're going to be cooling down. For us, by the time we come to 31st March, nature is sort of putting a hard stop to the harvest, because it's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Any sugar accumulation that's happening at that point is most likely happening through dehydration of the berries, and it's not happening through fresh photosynthesis having sugar accumulation into the berries. So you might get, sugar maturity, but you will struggle for flavor maturity. I'm just going to quickly check the chat box, Q&A. I see a couple of questions. Distribution we'll come to in a little bit. Do wineries have to chaptalize? At times we do, which might surprise you, because certain times blocks just get stuck, and it depends when you prune your vineyards. It's the timing of the pruning that happens over here just before harvest that will determine when you can harvest. And if the harvest is going late, you might just take a call that the acidity is falling off a cliff as you get hotter and hotter. So you're better off pulling the grapes in a little bit earlier and then seeing what you can do with that, because the flavors hopefully will be there, particularly if it's whites, and anything other than Cabernet can be okay at relatively lower alcohols for us. Okay, come to distribution later. I think spent enough time here. Gonna jump into our next slide, where I'm trying to explain a little bit about the different growing regions within India. So Solapur, let me just quickly go back a couple of slides, is down here in the southern part of Maharashtra. Nasik is very much northern Maharashtra, so this is about 20 degrees north. Solapur will be about 16, 17 degrees north. So I'm comparing a more southern region, so hence it'll be a bit of a warmer region. And one of the things we found is that, we started growing grapes in India, wine grapes in India in the mid-1980s, but really in any sort of large-scale, meaningful way only in this millennium. So in sort of the early 2000s is when the domestic wine revolution in India started. And so we don't have much history. So, we started up in Nasik, and everyone this is where we are and this is where we plant grapes. And what do you start with? You start with the most well-known international varieties, and you start with Cabernet. And it turned out that Cabernet in Nasik was not very good. It was this sort of dip in temperature right here in December and January. That meant that no matter what sugar maturity you got and what alcohol you got, even if you got 14.5, you still had herbaceous Cabernet Sauvignon, because at this point of the growing season, you just didn't have enough heat to blow off some of those green flavors that you want to get rid of. And Nasik Cabernet, a little bit of herbaceousness is very much in the DNA of Cabernet, of course, and it's a hallmark of the variety in Bordeaux, in Margaret River, California, maybe not so much, but definitely it's a part of the variety. But in India, for us, when I talk about it being herbaceous, it was at a level where it was unacceptable. It was not a mild level of herbaceousness. So over a period of time, of course, these vineyards had been planted for us, and we were taking the grapes from those vineyards while they were productive. We moved gradually. We realized that Nasik was not going to work, and we moved those Cabernet grapes to Solapur, where if you just contrast, you will see, because it's more southern and it's a bit closer to the equator and a bit warmer, you don't get that dip in temperature down to about 10 degrees in January. Typically it's more like 15 degrees, and it also warms up reasonably fast during the daytime, helping us blow off those green flavors of the Cabernet and get what I think is a really nice quality of Cabernet. And this has been an industry-wide shift that's happened with all of the Indian producers. And to me, this shift just sort of highlights the statement that, you know, we just started, what we started 35, 40 years ago. Realistically, we got going about 15 years ago, and we are just getting started. I mean, there is no history to wine in India. When I think about it, Bordeaux was classified in 1855, the left bank at least, after probably centuries of experience of what grew and what worked. And here we are, you know, 15, 20 years into the game, just starting to figure things out. And I think for me, this just highlights how early in the piece we are. Of course, I hope we don't take that long to figure it out. Certainly my aim is to at least say in the next 20, 30 years, we will be at a much better place. But it's going to be a long journey. I'm just going to quickly check the Q&A. All right, exports, marketing. I know that's something everyone's going to be interested in. We're going to come to that soon. All right, and grape varieties we're going to talk about shortly afterwards. So let's go on to the next, and I think that's where we'll end up spending some of our most time, because that's clearly where most of the questions are. So just a quick overview of viticulture in India. You know, we grow about, area under wine is about 300,000, or exact statistics aren't available. Let's say around 250,000 to 300,000 hectares. The vast majority of that, I would say closer to 98% or 97%, is planted with table grapes for eating and general consumption. And India is one of the world's key exporters of table grapes. One of the other interesting things about India is, you know, our population was 350 million at independence about 75 years ago. And in 75 years, population has grown 4x, and we're at 1.4 billion people today. So there's clearly been a population explosion. And what that has meant is that the average size of agricultural land holdings has just kept getting divided and divided, because everyone had 4, 5, 6 kids at one point in time. And the land got just divided, and then they had 4 or 5 kids, and it got divided further. The average size of a vineyard for us today is under 1 hectare. We have about 1,000, 1,100 hectares of vineyards that we contract for, and we work with 600 different growers, and all of those growers also have multiple small blocks. And that just highlights it's a very a unique system. You know, in many places in the world, people will talk about an average, or a minimum economically viable size of a vineyard as around 40 to 50 hectares for a grower to get a commercial return. We're talking 1 hectare. So it's basically this little, 14, 15 tons of grapes that this one farmer is growing. Is basically what is putting food on the table for him and his family. And he's out there, the landowner is out there working the land. It's that small. Of course, because we're in a warm climate, irrigation is absolutely essential. And the fun thing is that we have to prune our vineyards twice a year. Of course, we finish up our harvest in February, March, and we're going into our hottest time of the year. So obviously there's going to be no dormancy at all. We're going to go in, we're going to prune again a few days after harvest. It's immediately going to, there's immediately going to be fresh growth, but you're going to have a growing season where you're not going to take any crop, because 3 months later, or 2.5, 3 months later, you're going to have 700 mm to 1000 millimeters of rain. That's going to come down. And if you leave a crop on there, you're setting yourself up for all sorts of disease problems and pressures in the following season. And anyway, the crop will not mature, and the wine you make it'll barely be wine. It will be undrinkable, most certainly. So we've got to prune our vineyards twice a year. So we have 2 growing seasons in 1 year, but we only take 1 crop. And one of the things that's happening to us now, because climate change we're seeing it very much for ourselves here, is that the second pruning, which we typically do in September, we used to do about 20 days earlier, starting from the 20th of August. Now we mostly get going somewhere around 5th or 10th September. And that's because of climate change, the monsoon is structurally moving a little bit later. Earlier, we would be done with rain pretty much, by the first week of September, which was fine when we went into flowering. There was no impact. But now if we try to prune in August, there's a high likelihood of rain during flowering, leading to substantial disease pressures and crop loss. So we've just had to move the entire harvest pruning later, and that means harvest is also a little bit later on. The life of a vineyard block for us is 15 to 20 years, roughly double the number of growing seasons, 30 to 40. And that's because the poor plants are never getting a break. They're always growing. There's no dormancy. So it's a struggle to build up those carbohydrate reserves in the plants to have them sustain for a much longer time. And that remains a challenge for us. Quickly going to check the Q&A once again. Yes, is the lifespan of wine shorter? Absolutely. Phylloxera, that's an interesting one. Yes, phylloxera is very much present in the soil, but because of the monsoon and us getting 700, 800 millimeters of rain, it sort of washes away and never really takes hold. So we do have a lot of our older blocks planted on own roots. However, now from a best practices point of view, and just to be safe, we are planting on rootstocks and not going on own roots. The cooler area of the Himalayan slopes, it's interesting. There will, as I was saying in the beginning, there will definitely be areas where maybe it is possible, but finding that area, finding the balance, and finding the state which also allows wine production and alcohol bev production is a challenge, because this is still a complicated country to do business in, as judging from the questions in the Q&A, I'm sure some of you all are aware of. About reverse osmosis, definitely it's an option for us, but usually our alcohol levels are pretty moderate. We're talking typically 12.5 for the whites, on an average 13.5, 14 for the reds. So at least from an alcohol removal point of view, it's not something we really need to look at, really. And from a wine perspective, for VA removal, Brett removal, concentration, etc., it's something we've thought about, but we're happy to be a bit more natural and traditional. All right, just finishing up, last slide, and then I promise we're going to get into the market stuff, which everyone is pretty excited for, I think. The typical yields from a vineyard in India are 10 to 14 tons per hectare. We don't get very, very high yields because just, again, 2 growing seasons and the climate pattern is so unique. We definitely don't really see vineyards like you would see in sort of bulk producing regions of, let's say, Central California or the Riverland or the Riverina in Australia, where you would get 30, 40, 50 tons per hectare even. We don't have any of those vineyards. I don't think our wines can sustain that level of crop, given that they never go dormant. The average price of grapes for us is about $700 a ton. Whites are a little bit cheaper, reds are a little bit more expensive. A little bit high when you think about it, from an international perspective. Some of the things you've got to keep in mind there is it's the cost of 2 growing seasons loaded onto one crop, which of course increases stuff. Where also you're then looking at a small vineyard under 1 hectare typically for most growers. So you really don't have the economies of scale that you would in a much larger vineyard. For us and the rest of the industry as wine producers, we would typically sign 10 to 12-year contracts with our growers, and these vineyards would be planted for us. And we would pretty much take the grapes from those vineyards from the first crop to as long as the vineyard is active. We will take those grapes, and our contracts would typically have a price escalation every few years for the growers. As a developing country, of course, with the high interest rate scenario, we have reasonably high inflation. We've had inflation for a while, so price increases on our grapes are very much a given. And that's something that we continue to see, and we will continue to see. Indian wine, for some of you all who may have tried it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if anyone has, we've come a long way since then. I can imagine that 10 years, 15 years ago, the reactions would have been mixed and polite and diplomatic, we might say. Well, I'm happy to say today that, we've come a long way. Just the very fact that, we're here doing a WSET webinar and, talking about these things means the industry has reached a certain level of understanding of what it takes to make good wine in India. And the quality of wine just keeps getting better year on year. And I think you don't need to take my word for it. We've been, as Sula as a producer, and my fellow Indian wine producers as well, I think everyone's stepped up their game, and it's reflected if you look at just, some of the world's largest wine competitions. You will see Indian wines are winning awards and doing well. And this improvement in quality is definitely helping the local market also grow the wine category. Let's just take a... What are our challenges with pests? Biggest is downy mildew, I would say, just because of the amount of rain we get. We have to spray for it. Organic in our climate is very difficult. We follow sort of a more sustainable viticulture practices, but we do have to use, let us say, sort of chemical sprays. It's something that we would like to be free from, but at this point, we've not figured that out yet. What type of soil? Very, very mixed. I would say, different parts of different soils. We go from very, volcanic, red, iron-rich, free-draining soils to almost heavy black cotton soils in different parts of the country. And there's a lot of variability in soil, even within a 5-kilometer radius. Sort of hard to say, and we're still early days, so we're still exactly sort of figuring out what works where for us, which variety. Organic viticulture, tough. We would like to. The block in front of our winery, which is about 15, I go back to hectares, sorry, about 7 hectares, 7, 8 hectares, we do organically as sort of a test block. But we take absolutely zero crop from that vineyard, and it's more sort of an R&D block for us. Oh, well, there's lots of questions. I think I'm going to leave them for the Q&A. Otherwise, I'm never going to get to finish this presentation. So to those of you who I haven't gotten to, that we can talk about it in the Q&A. I'm going to move to the market side of things. All right. So alcohol consumption in India, we certainly drink a lot, but wine has been very much this 0%, a very, very, very small segment of Indian alcohol consumption. And I think it's a generational change. It's people my age, the 25 to 40 age group that is really going to be driving wine consumption. We've historically been a beer and spirits market, and we were very closed off to the rest of the world prior to 1991, which was when the Indian economy liberalized and India got more connected with the wider global economy. So, my parents' generation never really had any access or exposure to wine. My dad, to this day, no matter how much free wine I give him, will still drink his scotch. And then he got onto vodka. So he's very much a scotch and vodka drinker. And that is generational. A certain, I think people over the age of 40, 45, I'm generalizing, of course, there are going to be exceptions, but 90%, let us say, are beer and spirits drinkers. Wine is a small category, but it's growing fast, albeit from quite a small base. Wine consumption is growing 15% per year in volume terms. Of course, the Indian population is also growing, so thankfully that growth rate of population is sort of slowing down. Per capita consumption, it's a statistic that we used to say at one point was 1 tablespoon. So at least we've gone up from 15 mils to 25 mils. Yay for that. But long way to go to, I think world average was 8-10 liters per person per year. And parts of Europe, though I know even Europe, wine consumption in places is declining, 30-40 liters per person per year. For us, wine is very much a big city, urban area, urban India phenomenon. And from a socio-economic point, it's very much the middle class and the upper middle class who are driving wine consumption. If we talk about wine, the 3 million cases that we import, 3 million cases, that we consume, not import. 80% of what we consume within India is Indian wine, 20% is imports. And within imports, it's the New World that sort of dominates the imported wine scene in India, with Australia being by far and away the largest supplier of imported wine into India at 47%. And then when you put, Chile, the US, Argentina, and all the other New World producers who are in the other category, I think the New World is about 65% of our imported wine category. And I think people just find it, because India is a market where people don't know much about wine. They just find that when it's the name of the grape on the label, it's just that little bit easier. Wine is seen as being intimidating to people. They don't know how these grape varieties, how they're supposed to pronounce them even. For a lot of people, they would struggle to pronounce Cabernet. It would be Cabernet. Merlot would be Merlot. And there's just a whole fear and intimidation around wine where people, when they're out and about in a restaurant, they don't want to be seen making fools of themselves. So New World and just pronouncing the French grape varieties is hard enough. And then when it comes to all, your Tuscan regions and Bordeaux and Burgundy and Alsace and wherever, it just becomes so much harder for them to process. So that being said, France and Italy have done really well. I think Italy itself is probably the largest old world producer, because Italian food, as everywhere in the world, is so popular. And I must commend the Italian wine importers and the Italian wine producers for doing a good job, where every Italian restaurant you go to will always have a few Italian wines. Within the consumption bucket, this is the mix. A quick warning sort of here. This is sort of our mix of consumption, and we are probably more heavy on white, rosé, and sparkling than the market as a whole. So while I don't have any numbers, and numbers are sort of a hard thing to come by in our industry, I would sort of estimate, ballpark off the top of my head, that if I were to think about what reds would be like across consumption categories, we would probably be 65 to 70%, at least 65, if not 70. And reds are the category that's growing the fastest. One example I love to give is, people are still learning about wine, and, drinking wine as per the seasons and the climate is still sort of a new concept. We have people who visit our winery in April and May, which are our hottest months of the year. It's 40 degrees, 41, 42 degrees. People are sitting at 2 in the afternoon when it's 42 degrees, and they're drinking full-bodied red. And I don't understand it, but full power to them. Let them do what they enjoy. And if they enjoy red, then so be it. But, that traditional understanding of, whites in rosé in summer, reds in wintertime, not really. We don't really see that. It's people want to drink red pretty much all the time. And, even within reds, I would say the Indian palate wants softer wines, and wines that are more easily approachable, big, tannic, quite bold reds. Consumers here struggle to sort of get their heads around them, and they find them at times too intense. Indian food in the Indian palate doesn't really have a lot of bitter foods in its diet. We take our coffees and teas as well with lots of milk and lots of sugar typically. There are no bitter foods. And as a result, when wines are that big, they just come across to a lot of consumers as bitter. And it's sort of off-putting. And then the softer reds are more approachable. And on the whites, a little bit of residual sugar definitely helps. Our food, as I'm sure everyone's aware, can be a little bit spicy. And a little bit of residual sugar works well for balance. Rosé is another category, probably after reds, that has been surprising us with how fast it's been growing. It's the second fastest category, growing category after reds. And if I actually took sparkling rosé out of sparkling and put it into rosé, this category would be 14%. A lot of interest in the rosé category at the moment. This is sort of, I would say it is our mix of vineyard acreage of the grapes that Sula does. And I would say, given that, import Indian wine is 80% of consumption, and we are the largest within the Indian wine space, this can be considered fairly representative of what India drinks. Shiraz, the absolute single largest grape variety at 34%. Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon, Riesling, surprising, people would think a cool climate variety. We're a bit of a warmer climate, but around Nasik is where the whites are. So one thing I must point out is the white wine grapes are predominantly around Nasik, which is the cooler northern part of Maharashtra. And the red grapes are partly in northern Maharashtra. And the Cabernet is all down south, the southern part of the state, and in Karnataka, where it's a bit warmer. I would go so far as to say that for me, the Shiraz that's grown in Nasik is Syrah, and what we grow down south in the southern part of the state is Shiraz. The wines can be that different. It's a bit more elegant up in Nasik and a little bit more robust down south. Significant categories in others, and I think there's a lot of experimentation happening. People are planting all sorts of grape varieties. On the whites, there's Semillon, of course, people are experimenting with. Viognier, I think we do some really nice Viogniers. People are experimenting with Muller-Thurgau. Chardonnay is just getting going in India from a domestic production point of view, which is another key one. People are trying Italian varieties. I think like Grillo, there's one producer out there doing that. On reds, there's experimentation with Grenache. We do a lovely rosé from Grenache. We use it for that. Works really well. Mourvedre is interesting. Nero d'Avola, Sangiovese, Petit Verdot. We're just at that time where we're figuring out what is going to grow. A lot of darts are being thrown at the wall, and we're going to see what sticks. And this mix will change. And I hope it changes, because that means we will have progressed and we will have learned in 10 to 15 years' time. I'll give you a quick little overview of the wine market, and I think we will have a good amount of time for questions. You can't even think of India as one wine market. All our states are effectively their own country. There is no pan-India wine label. Every state, as domestic producers, for us, every state wants its own unique front label and back label. It becomes an absolute nightmare with stuff on the label in the local language of the state as well. And it just adds huge complexity to the entire wine operations. So to my friends from the international industry who are importing wine into India, at least y'all are spared from that to a large extent. I'm a bit jealous, but okay. The taxation and the final price to the consumer, of course, varies in each state. India implemented a national level goods and services tax to sort of homogenize indirect taxes across a wide variety of goods about 5, 6, 7 years ago. But alcohol and petroleum products were kept out of that, where those taxes are still controlled by each and every single state. Hence, the taxation regime in each and every state is going to be very different. And the same bottle of wine that, for example, could sell for, let's say, $10 in Maharashtra, which is the key state, could be $20 in another state, just because of different taxes within the country by different states. Consumption of wine, as alluded to earlier, is being driven by the younger generation. 25 to the 40 age group is what is driving consumption. It's being driven by women, interestingly enough. 30, 40, 50 years ago, women would not really drink alcohol. As the country modernizes, becomes a bit more progressive, and it becomes a bit more liberal, and income levels and education levels go up, more and more, Indian women like to and are happy to reach for a glass of wine, while their partners may still be reaching for Scotch. Scotch is huge in India still, but women are reaching for wine, and it's a phenomenal trend, and we love to see it. And wine is seen as a lifestyle choice and an aspirational beverage. It's something that for Indians, it was seen as, oh, we don't know this, we don't understand this, it's not our drink, it's what people drink in Europe, or in other parts of the world. And there is that level of aspirationality to it. And that's a great thing for the category as a whole, because it just means that consumption is going to grow. People, you see, if you watch Indian TV shows on Netflix, Amazon, or various other streaming platforms, you will see a lot of the consumers reaching for a glass of wine, talking about wine. There was a fun sort of, I would say almost a Sopranos-esque show on Amazon Prime where one gangster was sitting down and teaching another gangster how to drink wine and why you don't add ice and water to wine. It was quite fun. We really enjoyed that. But that's where, the level of knowledge is, that people have to be told that you don't add ice and water to wine. And that just goes to illustrate my last point, that the level of knowledge of the consumers is pretty low, but there's huge eagerness to learn, and people are curious. And that curiosity, I think, bodes well for the entire wine industry in the country, domestic, imported. I think a rising tide is going to lift all boats. And we see the Indian wine market continuing to grow, strong double-digit volume growth for the foreseeable future, I would say. So I hope that gives you a brief snapshot. I just want to leave you with a little bit about us, about Sula, who we are, what we do. We were started in 1999. The 2023 harvest, which just finished up for us about 6 months ago, was our 25th harvest. We've come a long way in 25 years. I think 60% of market share in wines, 60% market share in domestic wines, not overall. Within wines that cost, let's say, more than $7 or $8 a bottle. Overall, the share is a little bit lower. A lot of the cheaper category of wines is made using table grapes. We are also present in that category, but that's a small category and not a very interesting category for us. It's the premium wine category, which is our focus and which is the vast majority of our revenue as a business as well. We export to most of the leading markets of the world. I think we're present in most parts of mainland Europe, the UK, USA. We're looking for a new importer in Australia. And we are present, I would think, in Japan is another big one for us. We're present in about 15 markets, but up to this point, it's not really been a focus for us. 96, 97% of our volume is domestic, but exports is something we're starting to look at more and more. And the next stat is one I love because it just goes to show the thirst for wine knowledge in India. We are very much of the pioneers of wine tourism in India. The deck that you see here, the elevated deck, is our tasting room. It's where we like to say more people taste their first glass of wine than anywhere else on the planet. We get 350,000 visitors a year. We do believe we would be the world's most visited, or if not the most visited, amongst the most visited wineries in the world. And we have one of the world's largest wine tourism operations. We do have a huge tasting room. We run a few hotels on site. The buildings you see here in this picture down the bottom are our hotel rooms. We have a total of about 100 hotel rooms. Wine tourism is big. And one of the other key parts of our DNA is sustainability. You see it in all of these pictures here. Every single possible roof is plastered with solar panels. We were so happy to be sign up to the International Wineries for Climate Action, which is one of the world's leading winery groups in the sustainability space, founded by Familia Torres and Jackson family. So we're silver members of that, hoping to be gold in a few months' time, fingers crossed. And we get 60% of our energy through renewable on-site solar plants. And our logo as a company is the sun, so we might as well embrace the sun and fuel ourselves with the sun. So that was it. That was my presentation. I think we've gotten done right on time. I think happy to do 20 minutes or whatever of questions I have time. Alex, how do you want to do this?
Yeah, well, first of all, Karan, thank you so much. I first met Karan about, what, 7 years ago when I joined, and I knew some of this stuff, and I've been burning for everyone to know. It's fascinating. If you're interested in wine, how can you not be interested in what happens in India? And always something new. The fascinating way about the way the monsoon's moving, um, and how you're just adapting, because that's all you can do. You just have to adapt. So it's probably one vintage gets affected, but you make sure it doesn't afterwards. There's a feedback sign, just some housekeeping, and then I promise you we'll get into the questions. There's a feedback thing. If you'd please like to answer that, it really helps us. If you missed any of this, watch it again on the Global Hub, on WSET's got on YouTube. But let's get into the questions. I'm going to be really annoying and I'll ask a couple because, quite frankly, I'm presenting and I can ask this. You've been at the game for 15 years, you said, really in seriousness. So
Yeah.
in terms of the age of the vines, how long do you think they've got? When are you going to have to start replacing? Because you're talking about
We already are.
Yeah.
We already are. We find that on stuff like reds, particularly after 14, 15 years, it reaches the point where the economic return to the grape grower just doesn't justify keeping that vineyard alive. And there are growers who are replacing and replanting vineyards at 13 and 14 years. Okay. Our oldest block is about a block of Sauvignon Blanc that the contracted grower is doing for us, which might be about 20, 21 years old now. Wow. But definite big declines in productivity. I mean, of course, all of these older vineyards were planted when we didn't have the level of knowledge we do today. So I am very excited to see how the stuff we're planting now, how that holds up in 15 years and whether we can get a few more years out of that. But, a lot of the answers to these sorts of questions is, we'll see. We don't know.
Great. Just one other thing, because then I'll realize everyone jump in. Obviously, you had the grapes and what you're trying. It's really interesting. It looks like there's a pattern of what works in hotter climates. I'm surprised I haven't seen any Greek ones like a Certico, but there's two classics. When everyone starts learning with us, you can all see probably a reason why WSET is in India, the role we can play. The two ones, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Is there anything that Sula's doing recently with Chardonnay or Pinot Noir? Because those are the obvious ones that aren't there on that list.
So Chardonnay let's start with Chardonnay because that's an easier one, right? Chardonnay is very versatile. You have really warm climate Chardonnays, you have cool climate Chardonnays as well, where Pinot is more of a cool climate baby. We struggled for a long time with Chardonnay, but happy to say that over the last few years, we started producing Chardonnay. It would still be only 2% of our vineyard area. And Chardonnay doesn't crop very much at all. On a consistent basis, if we're lucky, we can get 7 to 8 tons per hectare max out of Chardonnay. It will not crop higher than that. And what that means for the grape growers is that, of course, they want a higher price because you've got to have equivalent output from that land. So the starting price for Chardonnay ends up being around $1,000 a ton, which puts USD a ton, all my figures, which means that Chardonnay starts off as an expensive wine. We don't really do sort of entry-level Chardonnay. And until we crack the code and start getting Chardonnay yielding a bit higher, more like 12 to 14 tons per hectare, which Chardonnay, I think commercial level Chardonnay can easily do, we're gonna struggle to have a $7-8 bottle of Chardonnay.
Okay. And
Pinot is something we tried for a while for sparkling. It didn't work. Happy to say that we've just launched a Pinot Noir. It's sort of we surprised ourselves, I would say, when we did that. We were not expecting to be able to do a Pinot Noir, but that just goes to show this is an area, and it's just going to keep surprising us. Anyone who's going to try and make some definitive statements will probably have egg on their face after a decade as things have changed. So we've learned not to make big definitive statements.
Cool. Okay, right. let's get on to some of the questions from more interesting people than me. Now, forgive me, guys, if I switch over. Some of you have asked quite a lot of questions. We've got a load of questions here. So let's start at the beginning. Adam Vignola, apologies also if I mispronounce names. Adam, I'm fairly certain of. I know how that's pronounced. What are the distribution issues for a winery trying to enter the Indian market? Are the rules and taxes different state by state? The answer really is yes, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. But, my base of general advice to people looking to bring wine into India, identify 2 or 3 cities and 2 or 3 states. You want to be in Mumbai, Maharashtra, which is the largest state for wine in the country. You want to be in Bangalore, which is Karnataka, which is the other wine producing state. So no surprise that the two wine producing states are also the 2 leading consumption states. Yep. It just makes sense. It's the way it is the world over. So you want to be in these 2 states, and these 2 states are liberal in terms of their policies because they have wine production themselves, and they are free pricing states as well. And you might want to look at maybe 1 or 2 other states, but my advice would be to not spread yourselves too thin. Focus on maybe 2 or 3 states. Keep patience. India is a market that is going to test everyone's patience. If an importer is promising huge volumes and going to change the world, run away. That's probably the wrong importer. It's going to be slow and gradual, but I think for people who are in it for the long term, it is a market that will pay dividends.
I also noticed how you didn't say Delhi, because that can be quite a challenge to get alcohol into Delhi sometimes, depending. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah,
it's more politics than alcohol.
Yes, exactly. Adam, there's a few questions I think we've kind of more or less covered. We've talked about that Sula does export, but there's kind of mainly domestic consumption. How does Sula compare to internationally produced Cab Sauv from Chile, Bordeaux, Australia? I think we talked about the kind of green nature.
Yeah. I think on that one, if I may do a little bit of marketing for ourselves, we were happy that, the global varietal masters that happened, we won a silver for our cab. We were absolutely thrilled.
Yeah.
10 years ago, Indian Cabernet was, now we're doing well. So happy. And I think just to answer a question that I had sort of seen earlier pop up in the chat,
please.
Why, and what you were alluding to as Alex as well, that, why not varieties like, some of the Greek varieties or the Georgian varieties or some of the Portuguese red varieties. As a market that is just learning about wine, it's too soon. People want the big 8, 10 internationally renowned varieties. It's just easier. The time for them will come. Will it come within my lifetime? I don't know.
A reductive question, but an interesting question. What's it better for, the climate? Is it better for white varieties or red varieties? You said that everyone drinks red, but is it actually better for white varieties, do you think, to grow?
So Nasik does both well, I think. It does sort of more cool climate expressions of reds and whites. And whites, it does really well because you've got a big day-night temperature gap of about 18 to 20 degrees at times, which helps preserve the acidity and the freshness. But warmer climate whites, something like a Fiano maybe would do amazingly well. But who knows Fiano and who would drink Fiano? I don't know.
Yeah, I would, but yes, no, true.
So would I, but the vast majority of people wouldn't. I think one of our best varieties is Viognier. We do really beautiful Viogniers, if I may say so myself. But people can't pronounce it, people are not interested in it, and people don't want to drink it.
Fair enough. Forgive me again, you might have already answered this, but what is the surface area of vineyards in India and how many hectolitres is produced by year? It's a good pop quiz, yeah.
I wouldn't know. Sort of total vineyard area would be sort of, let's say, 250,000 to 300,000 hectares. But keep in mind, over 98% of that is going to be for table grapes, 2% for wine grapes, and some of that stuff also going into a little bit of distillation for various other purposes. It's very small, but that exists as well. And interestingly, there were, at least till a few years ago, that we were exporting wine grapes all the way from Nasik to Nepal for making wine in Nepal. Can you imagine?
Yeah, Fair enough. Okay, so Mark,
Transported over 4 days after harvest. Goodness
crikey,
me.
how do you
In
keep that chill?
non-temperature controlled storage.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Um, is so Marco Heru's kind of a question I asked, but is the lifespan of vines shorter because of the lack of winter dormancy? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why people are replanting at 13, 14, 15 years.
Okay. Do the Indian wine regulations allow for reversed osmosis, the removal of water from the must?
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, we can, but we find we don't need to. I think we're at the stage where we've got to figure it out in the vineyard first. And
Yeah.
that's the key challenge, and is what is going to improve quality of Indian wines. Would there be cases for doing it? Yes. Does anybody in India do it? I don't think so, to the best of my knowledge. Certainly, we don't even own a reverse osmosis unit. Um,
Okay.
but interesting. We've looked at it from a technical point of view, but always said, nah, maybe not yet.
Okay. I'm going to skip any questions on organic because I think you kind of covered the reasons why it's quite a challenge. I think we probably all would want to be in a space to have that variety, but you've explained why that's a challenge. How do you ensure, though, the quality of the grapes by the growers, given the number of growers and smaller plots?
Let me tell you, it's not easy. We have a team of about, I think, 15 to 20 sort of, we call field officers, grower liaison officers, etc. And they're all assigned different areas and regions, and they will go and visit these producers once every couple of weeks in season, and maybe when it's monsoon and it's just raining and there's nothing really to do, might be a bit less often at that point in time, but it happens by visiting the growers, meeting them, and having endless cups of chai with them.
Sorry, I snorted then. It's patience, basically. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is an interesting question. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer could be. Which grape varieties are you planting to match with Indian food? The reason I say that's a tricky one is because there's really no such thing as Indian food. It really depends where you are in India. But I get the idea of what they're going at. It's
To me, honestly, I understand the question, but that is something we don't even think about
sure.
when we decide what grape to plant. Our first question is it going to grow in our climate? And if it's going to grow, is it going to make a reasonable economic return for the grape grower? And is the grape grower going to be happy to grow it? And that's the starting point. I think what we manage in order to have it pair with Indian food is a lot of our whites, with the exception of Sauvignon Blanc, which is under 2 grams residual, bone dry, are going to have a bit of residual sugar in them. We do our highest selling white, India's highest selling white is Chenin Blanc. It's an off-dry wine with about 17 to 18 grams of residual sugar. And India's highest selling rosé is ours, Zinfandel rosé, which is again at about 17 to 18 grams of residual sugar. And when you have that with food, particularly our level of spice, it works. And on the reds, you want softer tannins and wines that are more approachable.
Here's an interesting one. I think I know are there any government regulations regarding growing, bottling, and labeling, such as with AOC? So, for example, I notice some of your bottles, sparkling, carry Cremant de Nasic, for example.
They
Is that
don't
more?
anymore.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask, was it a marketing thing or a regulation thing? Yeah.
We thought it would be cool, but then we were being a little bit cheeky, and then Cremant is traditional method, and we were not. So we said, let's not do this.
Okay. That was going to be another question actually about with sparkling, about it says not traditional. Is anyone making a fortified wine in India, premium fortified wine?
No, there is fortified wine being made. In fact, there could be cases where the wine barely has any grapes in it, and the fortified wine is sort of less than $2 a bottle US. So you can imagine what it's like.
And yeah, fair enough. There's always a market for that, I guess. Interesting question. Does the socioeconomic makeup of India with a large Muslim population affect the acceptance and marketing of India wines?
Look at the amount of spirits and beer we drink. Everybody drinks
Yeah.
Even if you say that you're not drinking, most people are drinking a little bit. And I think particularly for wine and beer to be socially acceptable, COVID was a brilliant thing, because people usually had, I mean, the Indian government, there were no sales of alcohol for a few months. And even after that, for a long time, restaurants and, bars and pubs were completely shut. And, when alcohol sales restarted, people wanted to drink and you couldn't go out. And, the older generation, because the older generation is a bit more socially conservative, would typically be alcohol. No, no, no. It's a whatever, traditional social conservative approaches to alcohol. They said, okay, you can have beer or wine at home. We will allow that. Maybe don't drink whiskey at home. And this attitude remains. I have an uncle who's 60. His father is 80. He will still not drink alcohol in front of his dad
Oh, really?
at the age of 60.
Wow. Yeah, fair enough. So the two questions very similar from Clayton and Maxime. Clayton says, are there any native Indian grape varieties? Maxime, do Indian winemakers use local vine varieties?
There are local, but they're all sort of hybrid stable
Right.
grapes.
Okay.
Not very high quality. There's a lot of cheap wine made from Sultana, Thompson Seedless, sort of generic, neutral white, we could say. And then there are some of those generic red varieties as well. There were varieties like Bangalore Purple, Bangalore Blue, but they're not completely vinifera, and they will never make high quality wine.
Okay. This is a question maybe taking you away from the vineyard more into the boardroom. But so someone said this question, please. So I'm being polite and asking it. What's the outlook on investment opportunities when it comes to wine producing in India, and any plans for Sula to get publicly listed?
We are already publicly
There we
listed.
go. Yeah.
You can log on to the stock exchanges, so the Indian stock exchanges, or you can go onto our website and see all our financials and all our numbers. We got listed about 10 months ago. No, December last year, so about 11 months ago now. And there is investment happening in India. I think, LVMH is making wine in India. There is Chandon India. That is interesting. Pernod Ricard was trying to make wine in India at one point, then they exited, then they were looking at coming back in. And the whole conversation around Pernod Ricard at the moment is tied up around Jacob's Creek, and they have a lot of things going on their spirit side as well. So they're a little bit focused on that. Diageo has sort of exited wine anyway, really. But the opportunity is very much open for anyone to come in and, invest in India to make wine or to partner with existing companies. I think people would, a lot of domestic producers would welcome that.
Yeah. Okay, a couple of questions, similar ones from Sunita and from Patrick Vincent or Patrick Vincent, depending where you are. Sunita, for the export market, how do you see yourself setting yourselves apart? In other words, to compete with well-known New World wines. It's interesting to see India's New World. How will Sula or Indian wines find their niche? And Patrick he has his wine bar and shop. What would be your one selling proposition for Sula? What's your USP? Because he really wants to take your wines, but he's hesitating to know what the USP is.
Okay, so let me answer they're related. So thank you for asking them together. I think for exports, the honest answer is we're still sort of finding our way. I think quality has today, over the last 4 or 5 years, come to a stage where we can happily go out there and put our wines in front of consumers and be like, people will be like, yes, this is good and this is perfectly commercially acceptable. The challenge for us is, of course, given our high cost of grapes relatively to many other places in the world, Indian wine will never be as cheap as sort of some of the bulk coming out of Chile or Australia or that places, simply because of the way our grape prices are. So we will always be a little bit more expensive, and that's just the nature of things. Our story has to be to go with Indian food. The Italians in India have done an amazing job with Italian food and Italian wine. And given how popular Indian food is world over, chicken tikka masala in the UK,
Yep.
it's a natural entry point. I think now is the time for the Indian industry to start focusing on exports. And I think the USP is for Indian wine is just to taste wine made in such a faraway, exotic place where the terroir and the climate is so different. Uh, you know, it's probably for me, when I think about it, I always, in my mind, and when I talk to people, I say it's the Wild West of making wine in India. It's the Wild West of the wine world. We're experimenting, doing crazy things, and figuring out what works.
Okay, we're coming to probably two more questions, I'm afraid. Sorry, guys. I think as it said in the message, there's too many questions, but we'll do a few. Oh, so Nitin, interesting one. It's a bit darker, so we'll go with a happy one afterwards. But climate crisis, my personal opinion, it's a reality. Is it estimated it's estimated we have just 60 harvests left when it comes to wheat and barley. Okay, what's the global outlook for grape growers?
I don't think I can speak on the global outlook.
Sure.
I am not even remotely qualified to do that. I think for us, in our region, we've been around 25 years, and in 25 years, we can see climate change, and it's very real for us. Summers are hotter, monsoons are more erratic, they're structurally later. And India as a country is very monsoon dependent. A bad monsoon can shave off a couple of percentage points of the country's GDP growth. Because agriculture is still huge for the economy. We're doing our bit by being sustainable and doing everything we can to be sustainable, hence our membership of the IWCA and everything we're doing on that front. India has committed to being net zero by 2070, a little bit later on as a developing country. We, however, as part of the IWC, are fully committed to 2050 as a company to be net zero. We would like to be net zero sooner than that, of course, as well. And that's something that's a priority for us. And what we do to encourage that is when we do our investment decisions, capital expenditure decisions, we allow very long return on investments for any project that would have a sustainable impact.
Okay. Last one, I thought we'd take you back into the vineyard. There's someone asking about the nuts and bolts of Indian wine, Greg Harrison. I guess you can answer in some quite short fire questions, some keep it basic bullet points. But he goes, what are the nuts and bolts of Indian wine? And someone thinks, he says, closure type, bottle style, pet nats, fining, barrel aging, French oak.
Okay, perfect. Good questions. Bottle, pretty much universally screw cap, except for sparklings. We were getting, sorry to my Portuguese, if any of my Portuguese friends are on this call, but we were not getting very good quality corks. And because there was no history of wine in India back, I think in 2008 or 2010, somewhere around there, we decided let's just move to screw cap. It's easier. There is no prior experience of, cork in this market. There's no preconceived notion. So let's just do screw cap. And anyway, most households don't even own a corkscrew, and they wouldn't know how to use one if you gave it to them,
right?
At least to a newbie. So that's the bar, right? So it's screw cap, bottle types, all the traditional bottle shapes, the Burgundy shape, the Bordeaux shape, the hawk bottle for the Rieslings, pretty standard. We would recommend that you're coming into India just as don't put your whites in transparent flint bottles. Given our storage conditions, you want darker glass and to keep your whites especially protected. Rosé, well, you have to do transparent. But for whites, please, I would urge everyone exporting to India not to put your whites in transparent glass. Pet nat, not really. Barrel aging, yes, for the more expensive stuff or anything. For reds costing more than, let me say, about $15 a bottle, there will be barrel aging. What we find is that our wines pick up a lot of oak pretty quick. Of course, our barrel rooms are fully temperature controlled, humidity controlled, but still it's probably the nature of our fruit. And we would typically be, for our flagship Syrahs and Cabernets, which would sit around the $18 to $20 to $23 price point, would be at 15 to 20% new oak. Anything more than that, we find gets a bit too oaky and you lose the fruit.
Okay, that's great. I think yeah, it's we've had a long time. Karan, thank you so much. Once again, COO and Chief Winemaker at Sula. Guys, if you want to watch it again, so much detail here, go to the WST Global Hub on YouTube. Make sure you finish the feedback. Again, if you're in India, come and see us at ProWine Mumbai. Karan will be there.
And come and see us at Sula.
Yeah, exactly. Come and see them at Sula. Even I'll be there for WSET. Guys, thanks a lot. And that's it. See you later. Have a good weekend.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone, for attending. So glad to share this all with all of you.